Okay, ladies and gents, we have our panel up there ready to ask questions or answer your questions. So what I'm going to do is going to come around to the tables, get a nominated individual, just have a quick recap of some of the key things that you've come up with. I'll put some of those things to the panel, and if you have any specific questions of the panel, we can go from there. Do I have any volunteers in terms of anyone bursting at the seams who would really like to start the discussion with the panel?
Neal Thompson, Centennial Coal. Some of the strengths we identified was this type of workshop and this type of collaboration with industry, and sort of letting us know where regulatory movements are going. And what have we got there? These workshops create dialogue. They stimulate dialogue between regulators, between industry groups. They're real positive. Industry, I think, is started to turn the corner, starting what David was saying about starting to look towards the end goal as opposed to the now, as resources get tighter, costs drop, this sort of thing. So they were the kind of main strengths we had. Weaknesses we had were industry not planning appropriately for the life of mine type closure, the upfront liability not properly costed at times, so decisions made without that full picture. David touched on that in his presentations as well. And some of the threats we came up with was like changes in the regulatory approach at times. Opportunities. One main opportunity we thought was this type of workshop again, and to increase the frequency of these sort of things, because over time you build relationships with people. And one of the key things we've identified is the lack of appropriate material to close some of these tailing structures. Why in New South Wales we have some of these large infrastructure projects going, the Sydney tunnels, the Connects tunnels, they're producing appropriate material for capping, but the regulatory process can be quite restrictive to getting that material to the sites to have a material on site. So, an opportunity, we thought if there's a way that could be looked at to streamline where there's a net beneficial gain, if you can get that material on site now as opposed to the cost of trying to find it or even get it in 20, 30 years, we believe that's a real opportunity that we came up with. So,
actually, is Daryl Cliff on the panel? Where's Daryl? I was just going to say, do you want to answer that question in terms of potentially...
Simple.
I'm thinking about more in terms of does that form a waste that's being generated from like the construction of tunnels and things like that, and if it's inert waste, is there any opportunity there to actually look at that and get that out to some of the sites who are desperate for capping material?
Wallerawang Power Station site for rehab of all the ash emplacements out there. So there are a number of landfills and other sites where WestConnect's waste is being taken out and used on site or stockpiled for later use.
So do we have any comments from the panel on any of those opportunities?
Just on the waste, whether you could use waste from construction or whatever. Usually what kills it is the transport cost. Interestingly, of the three tunnels that have been built in recent times in Brisbane, Clem 7 and the Airport Link were both transported off-site and used elsewhere, but the Legacy Way one, all the material was conveyed back through the tunnel as they built it and dumped into an old quarry, the Mount Cootha quarry. And the main reason they did that, because they didn't have a particular use for it, the main reason they did it was to keep trucks off the road in that region, in that area, because the public uproar against having loaded trucks on the roads would have probably killed it.
All right, sorry. My name's Mark. I'm from the Resource Regulators. I think some of the strengths we looked at was systems in place, so having critical controls, the introduction of having those strong systems in place, utilising third-party consultants to assist where there's gaps in knowledge. Some of the strengths of the regulators, they're having the keenness and open dialogue between the resource regulator and industry, so issues like sort of forums like this. Some of the weaknesses, sharing cross-pollination, sharing between the metalliferous and the coal, so that's not always so good. Costings, so looking at right now rather than someone looking at the long-term sort of costing estimates and all that for the, the modelling. Opportunities, the cross-pollination between the different types of mining, like the rock and the coal. Some of the things for regulators, so maybe weren't so great, but they were not looking just at compliance only, so it seems to be more of a compliance focus from out there and looking a bit more facilitation as well. Some of the threats, the costs, so upfront, so it needs funding. This lack of experts in the field, bit of lack of communication between different companies. So there's not always that someone next door might be doing something different, and it's not that always communicated very well. And there's a bit of this is the way we've always done it. So it's not always sort of, innovation is not always happening.
I guess my question from David on that one there is that you've seen a number of jurisdictions across the world, and some of these issues are lack of expertise, etc. Have you seen somewhere that's actually managed that issue or addressed that issue in terms of actually getting that expertise?
I think it's only going to get worse because there's actually a gap in the age range from about 40 to 60. And that's because my age group took all the jobs, and Generation X, which came after us, didn't get so many. So there's that huge gap. And while they used to be called Generation Y because they kept asking why, but now they're called millennials. They may be quite bright and they may think they have all the answers, but of course they don't have the experience base. So people in my age bracket could keep working forever, which is why Nordy Morgenstern is still working at the age of 84, 85. I don't think I'll go that long, but I think there's a huge gap, and it's right across the board. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about tailings or anything, virtually anything technical, there's a huge gap. And I don't think universities are up to filling that gap. I think it's going to have to depend on groups that need the gaps filled, running or organising, facilitating, continuing professional development type programs. And meetings like this help as well. Transfer of knowledge that way. It's probably not going to be done formally. We just can't produce them quickly enough.
I'm going to attack this group here because I think you actually had a potential solution for that issue.
I'll keep it brief because we only wrote 4 pages. I guess we'll start off with the strengths. We break them down into industry and regulator. So we looked at, obviously there is an availability of good design in the industry, and that's principally because we have access to some good experts that you can bring in for tail storage. So we do have the opportunity to engage those experts. We've got workforce engagement, so they've got the skills and the capacity in order to fulfill some of those needs. The industry has got quite stringent annual reporting, so we report quite regularly, obviously, to various industries or various regulatory bodies in order to make sure that things are going as well as they should. Some of the strengths of the regulator themselves, so you've got regular contact, regular communication from Dam Safety Committee, good published materials available on a lot of the websites. The more dealing with the EPA than with the resource regulator, so there's a lot more interaction there. Resource regulator keeps industry focused on its requirements, and that's sort of a tie-in to, I guess, the auditing strategy that they've rolled out. And obviously you've got more personnel on site from the regulator, and the audit documents are quite a consistent approach. Some of the weaknesses we picked up across the industry is an unwillingness to share information. So we tend to operate in very specific silos and not share that information with some of our other partners in the local area. And that includes and extends to things like utilising monitoring data. We've got other resource limitations, attracting right candidates, etc. I think which you touched on before, trying to upskill and bring somebody along that journey so that they've got the knowledge in order to take that issue on through the future. Production drives a lot of the rehab, so a lot of it's funding related. We've got issues with community involvement now as well, because you've now got quite a large vocal community, especially utilising online media like Facebook and that type of, they can drum up quite a lot of support and quite a lot of angst. Unfortunately, one of the weaknesses for industry is having fixed R&D budgets. So a lot of these opportunities don't see the light of day because there simply isn't a budget that they allocate to those. Weaknesses for the regulator, coordination of government agencies. So you tend to have to deal with quite a few different agencies in order to get approvals through the board.
Coordination of government agencies, I think we spoke a little bit about it before, about the Cadia incident that occurred, and to me that really highlighted gaps in coordination that occurred, particularly around incident response and getting out consistent sort of media releases, who's the lead agency, all those kind of questions. So look, all I can say is, yeah, I agree, and me being here and along with resource regulators and other regulators in the room, as I can say that we are working on that together, to improve it. I think even to the extent where with the changes that are foreshadowed in government, in clusters, I think we're even going to be in the same government cluster soon, or we probably are. So watch this space in terms of increasing coordination.
I think it's pretty clear from a safety point of view that the resource regulator for operational safety is looking at workers on a tailings dam, workers below a tailings dam, and risks involved. Principal hazard management plans for a mine site, the inundation and inrush, the ground control management plan, and the roads and vehicles or traffic management plan. Most sites have those, and they apply specifically to the site, but they also deal with some of the challenges and the risks and appropriate controls for a tailings dam. They slightly overlap, but there's also different focuses. It's pretty clear. I think resource regulators' safety is looking at the workers on the dam and around the dam.
Yep. Well, just to continue on some of the weaknesses we identified, that some of the feedback you get back from the regulator is based more around personal opinion and their personal exposure. So what they've seen before, there's seen to be a non-level playing field in some circumstances. There isn't an equivalent to the MISAC or MSAC for environmental related issues. So there isn't an opportunity, well, it's a weakness because we don't have a forum in order to discuss positive behaviours and reinforce positive behaviours. And also some of the legislation is literally impossible to achieve, for mine closures especially. So some of the opportunities for industry is obviously access to forums like this think tank. Industry has the opportunity to drive a lot of innovation. That can also help with these think tanks to get projects off the ground, especially if it's R&D or development. Learning from disasters, there's opportunity to learn from them. That's both from an industry perspective and for a regulator perspective. Working with industry to establish a MISAC model, which I think we explained before, and the potential to harmonise environmental legislation, much like they've done here in New South Wales with the Workplace Health and Safety Act, having a look at the opportunity to harmonise an environmental legislation body so you have one rule book in order to work to, rather than multiple ones. Some of the threats, obviously commodity prices, that obviously affects budgets, resources, people, the opportunity to innovate. You've got legacy issues that are affecting the industry as well. Impractical non-mining land use, changes in closure goalposts, changing in legislation, which changes again the goalposts. So you might write a mine closure plan that's approved to this current legislation. A new piece of legislation comes in before obviously that mine plan is enacted, and it may no longer be consistent. With the regulators, you've got time lag for approvals, dealing with different regulators with different focus, and the direction of departments. What's that one? Not providing advice. Yeah, unfortunately, in the current climate, you've got departments are not allowed to provide specific advice to companies or to the people that they're regulating, which unfortunately means that the industry has to almost guess what the regulator wants in order to try and comply with it. Whereas if there was a lot more guidance, then that would obviously remove that potential threat.
I'll just clarify, I guess, in terms of the role of the regulator. I think how a lot of regulators used to regulate was very prescriptive in terms of how you do things, and sometimes we used to tell people how to do things, and that's a risk to the regulator because we actually take on that if something fails. But it is a very strong focus of the regulator to actually provide that guidance. to work at that lower part of the compliance enforcement pyramid, which is really facilitating knowledge transfer. So if I'm going out to a site, because we get to see a lot of sites, I see something not working well, and I guess our approach now is, hey, how about going and have a chat to these guys, because they've got the same issue, but they've actually got a pretty good technique there you might want to investigate and see how it's adaptable to your site. So it's not that we won't give advice, it's probably more pointing you in the right direction in terms of what you need to actually go and do. Any thoughts from the panel at all?
It's a bit of a hard one because you can't, on the one hand, criticise a regulator for giving his or her personal opinion, and then on the other hand want advice or guidance from them. They're not going to give you that sort of guidance for the simple reason they are potentially liable for it if they give you wrong advice and it proves not to work. But I'd endorse, certainly the industry itself needs to work more closely together. Even sometimes within the same company, different operations in the same company don't talk to each other. You've all got the same problems.
Okay, Gavin Hoskins, Resource Regulator. We sort of identified, I guess, most of the other things that the other groups have identified, but I'll just quickly run through these. And we've segregated them into industry and the regulator as well. So some of the strengths we're seeing, the mines are basically using a bit of a risk management approach these days. Just over the last few years we've seen that. Even when new dams are being installed, they're looking at the final landform, like for the end, I guess, close the mine. Using more modern day deposition techniques, e.g. more spigots. So that's the strengths. For industry, regulator, they're willing to change. That's a strength of ours. We don't want to keep it as usual, business as usual. Just engaging industry in forums and things like this. Weaknesses, industries, they don't want to adapt or have the ability to adapt. The lack of industry knowledge and the sharing, the silos. Don't learn lessons from the regulator, interventions or outcomes. Environmental priorities low. Okay, so mining, basically production, really, at the end of the day. Regulator, our weaknesses, a lack of advice provided, and again, that just comes down to a bit of education. Cross-agency collaboration is exactly the same as the other guy said. Lack of consistent approach or consistency in approach. So that's some of the weaknesses. Opportunities for industries, more collaboration. Again, roundtables and things like this, and talking amongst themselves. With the regulator, information sharing by regulators and individual mines, coordination of activities like this. Some of the threats, not utilising existing knowledge for industries, not adopting modern technologies, moving with the times basically, not using a holistic risk-based approach. John was mentioned about tailings, dams, roads, ground support, inundation inrush, so not looking at it holistically, and the cost of implementing technologies for the smaller operations. So obviously comes down to a price. Threats for us as a regulator, lack of experience, lack of consistency, over-regulation, lots of agencies to deal with, that's been brought up before, too much red tape, short time planning timeframes for review, so something comes in for review and we don't have enough time to process. And basically industry can just walk away from their sites prior to closure. You know, how do we deal with that? That's certainly a big threat. And that's basically us.
Now, I think we're starting to find a lot of the same issues, so I'm only going to ask one more table, but while I do that, can people have a bit of a think about other questions they might actually want to directly ask the panel?
Okay, for Evolution Mining here, yeah, as people have said, we've got a lot of the same themes going through. We broke our SWOT analysis down into 3 different areas. So we've got design feasibility approvals, and then we had construction operation phase, and finally into the rehab closure. And we did talk about industry, and then, you know, the client being us throughout this, so yeah, it sort of switches back and forth a little bit. But so in the design area for strengths, we've got DSC being content experts, so it's good that you've got someone having a look over that dam design who are Actually, that's their area of specialty. And also multiple layers of government, but that can be a strength and a weakness, so sits on both sides of the fence there. Some other weaknesses were underestimating rehabilitation liability, so that can work for industry and government, so it's a little bit of a crosses the fence there. Inconsistencies between departments, so it's the government departments, and when we're presenting things and we're getting different feedback from different areas. And then multiple acts and how they don't link terribly well. So we're moving to opportunities on the design side. So we'd say improve collaboration between the departments and also sites, so having forums such as this, streamlining that approval process and standardising acts and regs. Threats in that area were over-regulation, delays in approval, too many layers in the approval process, change of regulation during the process of design and approval, community perception of mining, that's a bit of a global issue at the moment, and basis for best practice, leading practices, good practice, and how that affects design thinking. Moving into the construction, alteration, operation, so this is very site-based. Strengths around process for alteration are well defined. So at site, we go into our change management, how we apply our risk assessment models and critical controls, etc. Weaknesses are around could impact on time, urgency if process is delayed. So we don't want to rush through modifications. And we had threats in there, change of regulation during the life of the dam. And then moving into the final phase, decommissioning and rehab, mine closure and relinquishment. Strengths, final use can be defined to enable relinquishment. Weaknesses, requirements seem to be written for coal, some difficulty in relating to metalliferous. That's with regards to estimation of costs, the cost formula. Could underestimate the actual for us. Formula needs to be customised to site, and it's something we could probably work on together as an industry. No need for a mine closure plan in New South Wales at the moment, but the MOP covers some of the aspects of that mine closure plan. In opportunities, we've got New South Wales to improve interaction between mines. Something like the Central Queensland Rehab Group, Hunter Valley Rehab Group, and I know over in Kalgoorlie they have the Goldfields Environmental Group. They're very strong and very collaborative. And metals seem to be the poor cousins. I don't know who wrote this. And then finally the threats to that decommissioning phase are failure to meet the criteria and funds expended too early.
I guess just a comment from me in terms of decommissioning. I think that's probably one of the weaknesses of industry at the moment is the, and I would say of a regulator, is the lack of completion criteria or specific criteria. I think there's a long way to go there to be able to define what is successful closure of a tailings dam. I'll throw this one back to David. Have you seen any good closure criteria developed for tailings dams across the world?
Well, there aren't too many examples of really good tailings closure. There really aren't. That one I was involved in Arizona was a rare example, one that worked quite well in the end. Interestingly, though, it was an open pit that became a block cave. It had a heap leach as well, and at the same time as they were talking about how they would handle the tailings, they were talking about how they'd handle the heap leach mound as well, dump as well. And with that one, they'd already committed to doing a conventional contour bank downslope drain solution using only rock where it was where the drains were, and using the local alluvium elsewhere, which was highly erodible, by the way, and you could see that in the natural environment. Anyway, they went ahead with that. They almost banned me from looking at it. Well, they didn't want me to comment on it. They went ahead, did it. The first decent rain they had, and this is an area that gets 200 mil of rain a year, so it's not a high rainfall area. The first decent rainstorm they had, it failed dramatically. So they reshaped it and covered it with rock entirely, which was more or less the solution I'd recommended for the tailings. So there aren't many good examples. I think there's far less done on tailings closure than waste rock dump closure. There's been a lot more done on waste rock dumps. So we need some good examples out there.
Okay, so any particular questions for any members of the panel based on presentations today? Anything on David's presentation from this afternoon?
Hi, my name's Michael. I was just wondering, we're sitting here at a point in time, is there any comments from the panel on say particular changes or trends in terms of tailings and closure over the next 10, 20 years? So say tailings dams that we're designing now, what's going to be different when those dams are actually going to be closed, say 10, 20, 30 years down the track?
So one of the things that happens, I think, is a default option. And I'll give as one example, my perception of the Hunter Valley is that there have been virtually no surface tailings storages approved for the last decade or so, so they've gone in pit. And they haven't thought that out well either, because the pits fill up very quickly with tailings because there's limited consolidation, no desiccation. Then they find another pit. And there are also examples of, because you've also got the question of preserving resources, there are examples where they're looking at removing the tailings from pits so they can mine them deeper. So clearly not well thought out. So I think there's been there's often that default thing, we're not allowed to do this, we'll have to do something else, we've got to put it somewhere, so we'll find somewhere else to put it, like a hole in the ground. Hasn't yet hit the Bowen Basin as much, but there's some of it, some of that there, going on there as well. There's a strong reluctance, if you look at Western Australia, for example, it may not still apply, but it certainly applied for a long time. You could not put anything in pits because many of their ore bodies were steeply dipping. They were a potential future resource, so you weren't allowed to put anything in pits. That's changing slowly, and there are a few locations where St Ives Gold, for example, on Lake Lefroy, which is a big salt lake, were mining a series of pits and backfilling them as they went. Not necessarily with tailings, maybe just with waste rock, but they were progressively backfilling them. So it's changing. But you've got to weigh up all those different things, as to make your choice. Difficult.
David, so the biggest issue seems water management, right? So we have 100 plus tailings dams on surface that are existing already that potentially can't have spillways redesigned into them. So we're having to manage now the water that's already within them and retrofit or come up with other solutions. So what are we looking at? Is there no way that we can, connect to the herringbone drains and suck them out to reduce, increase the rate of drop of our phreatic zone? Should we not be planting trees on surface that evapotranspirate at higher rates? Are there not those kind of things? What are the options, the alternatives that are being looked at for existing facilities that we can't redesign?
Very hard to do anything much with existing facilities. If you were going to try and drain tailings, you have to do it progressively as you're depositing, because the permeability of tailings is just too low, and the drainage path lengths become too long, they simply won't drain. And even, South Africa pioneered under drains beneath tailings, and they work very well for a while, until it's not the drains that clog, it's the tailings that forms a filter cake against the drain, because they're consolidating. Tailings close to the drain consolidate first, and their permeability goes down. They effectively block it from... So you'll sometimes do a series of drains. You'll put under drains in, then another series of drains at a higher elevation, that sort of thing. People talk about doing things retrospectively, wick drains, for example, that sort of thing. Expensive. Wick drains are also... affected by the same problem, that around the wick, the tailings drain, they form a lower permeability, they inhibit the drainage of tailings further away. So you've got to put in wicks at very close centres, it becomes very expensive. But you've got to be able to get out onto it to put the wicks in the first place. So all those things are retrospective. Probably one of the few retrospective things that does work quite well, at least in red mud, is farming. So you're putting your mechanical effort to dewater in after the deposit of the tailings, but you're still doing thin layers. You're doing about 1 metre maximum thickness, and you're treating that by amphi-rolling, and then you're able to, if you do that successfully, you can doze afterwards. You can't retrospectively treat the whole thing. You've got to do it in a series of layers. So all those are problematic. There was another comment I was going to make in relation to closure is that if you're in a dry climate, which most of Australia is, inevitably, if you have a pit which will form some sort of lake, now whether it's got tailings in it or not is irrelevant. The water in that pit will become progressively poorer quality over time because we've got a net evaporative climate. So even if it's not acidic, it will become increasingly saline. And in most parts of Australia, most of the dry parts of Australia, you do not have sufficient supplies of fresh water to dilute that. Hunter Valley, there's no spare water to go around. The other users are going to use the rest of the water. So if you end up with a hole in the ground, it will inevitably be a pit of poor quality water of a certain depth. It'll fluctuate with time, but it'll never become much better because you've got evaporative forces. So the end result of that is that if you want to avoid that happening, you need to backfill them. The only economically viable way of backfilling them is during operation, putting waste into them. The only viable option. You're not going to do it retrospectively, it's just far too expensive. All your equipment's gone by then, and all your cash flow's gone by then. You won't do it. And if you want to take the extreme, the oil sands industry, and we hear quite a lot about that in northern Alberta, they have a slightly net positive water balance naturally, but their rainfall's quite low, or their precipitation, because some of it's snow. It's only about 425 mil a year. In Australia, it would be semi-arid. But they have a slightly net positive water balance. They have lots of lakes, naturally. But the process of mining is leaving a lot more open voids than you would have naturally as a proportion of the total area. So they've already turned a slightly net positive water balance into a negative one. And they're locked in. There's no way they can resolve that because they're not backfilling those holes. They also have, the first mines that went in were not zero discharge, but all the subsequent ones have been. So they're storing increasing volumes of poor quality water, and it's going increasingly saline. They have no no closure option. They've ruled it out. Their only option would be to treat water and discharge in perpetuity.
With the Dam Safety Committee moving to an auditing role, have you actually got enough bums on seats to go out on site and do it, or are you going to rely on third parties?
That's a good question. Haven't resolved that one yet. Our immediate focus is to start consultation on the new regulations and the new way of operating. This stage looking probably around about, hopefully next month, where we're looking to start the consultation process. I reckon that might take us to about September before we actually switch on the new regulation. Important to note that there will be adequate phase-in periods, and then during that period we'll work out the bums on seats number. But yes, no, there will be, to move to an auditing role, yes, certainly there will be increase in number in our staff. That's definite. Yeah. Whether it's going to be makeup of internal, external, supported or not, we haven't gone that far to work it out yet.
Just while we're waiting on the next question, thought occurs to me too that I think the state, where the industry is in relation to closure, I think where it is, where companies are at the moment, is largely trying to cost closure without actually doing it. They're doing that for accounting reasons. So they need to be able to carry on their books the cost of closure, but they're not actually doing it. And they're basing that on very poor cost information because they haven't done it. And if they ask consultants to give them advice, that's not necessarily good advice either because they haven't done it either. So they tend to inflate the costs. You might be happy to keep that on your books, but I think it actually gives you more incentive not to do it rather than to do it. So I'd encourage industry to pick your first cab off the rank and actually do it. Actually do a closure, maybe a modest one, but not a trial, not a dinky little thing, but actually do it. And get a much better picture of what methods work and what your costing might be. Then you've got a much better basis then for getting the rest of your costing right.
Hi David, I've got a question for you. It's with regard to upstream rises for tailings dam construction, and considering the practice has been banned in Chile and possibly is going to be banned in Brazil, do you think that's something that we should consider in Australia?
I think it's tantamount to prescriptive regulation, and I'm dead against prescriptive regulation. So, but unfortunately, if the industry in certain jurisdictions does not perform well, it'll become prescriptive. So that's what's happening in Brazil. There has been a little bit of talk about, whether that should be broadened to other areas. I hope that's not the case. I don't think we've had sufficient poor performance, or really a large amount of poor performance on upstream construction in Australia to warrant that prescriptive approach.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I might start to wrap up proceedings.
Actually, could I offer just a little anecdote? So, we have a beach, or it's not actually beach, it overlooks the beach on the Sunshine Coast. So on the way up, there's you can see, if you know where it is, through the trees, you can see an old sand mining operation. So, we'll source sand from natural alluvial flats, or we might get it from, we might screen it out of quarrying or whatever. This was a small-scale alluvial thing, but it supplied sand to the Sunshine Coast region. And I know where it is because I actually did a little bit of consulting for them. They finished, they exhausted their supply of sand. They left behind these pits, degrading pits with little lakes in them. They're not that deep, but they're hidden behind trees. No one knows where they are. The same company applied to do the same in a much more visible piece of floodplain, which anyone who knows it is just off the road. It's like a causeway across a low-lying area, the road to Maroochydore from Nambour. And initially the council passed it. And then there was uproar from all the, people overlooking them from Butterham Hill, overlooking this area. People running along the road could see it. It hadn't started yet. So all these signs went up, and they managed to persuade the council to overrule what they'd previously approved, and they disallowed it. Then, of course, the company have taken them to court because they first allowed it and then didn't. Anyway, now, why didn't they think of that a bit more laterally? Clearly, it was a location was very visible. It's got Canal Estate's not that far away. It's got housing development up on the hill. Why did they not go in league with a developer and create Canal Estates, because it's all flood-prone land, wetland habitat, but in the process take a bit of sand out? Now, I'm sure if they'd gone that tack instead, they might have had more luck in doing the development. They'd end up adding value to the site. And I think we're at a point where if mining companies can come up with a way of adding real value post-mining, you'd go a long way to restoring your trust from the community and your social and financial licenses to operate. And you need many of those, you need lots of those examples. Because otherwise it's a downhill road. That's the way it's going. It's getting harder and harder for you to operate, and you're getting a dirtier and dirtier name. And I think you could do a lot better, really.
Please thank the panel today. And thanks Matt for running the session as well. So thank you everyone for your attention today and following the cues to offer us a smooth running of this event. I'd like to thank all the speakers who participated today, in particular David, who came down from Queensland this morning so soon after return from Brazil. I'd also like to thank the regulators for facilitating the SWOT analysis section, and also the organisers for helping with administration and organisation of the event today. But a large thank you, I think, needs to go out to the audience for your active participation. There was a comment during the workshop session made that wouldn't it be nice if the principal walked in just now to see this, because everyone was actually actively working during the workshop session. It's really nice to see that. So we've all got busy schedules, and today we've been able to discuss some of the risks and the opportunities as well. Your presence today shows the importance of events such as these, and we'd really like to have more opportunities where regulators and industry can work together to promote improved outcomes. And this does together promote to create a culture of leading practice management in this space, so I really thank you for your participation today. I'd like to call on Matthew Newton to the stage for his closing remarks and to discuss where to from here for the Compliance Priority Project.
I know everybody's very keen to get away and have a beer and hit the road, so I'm going to be very quick here. Listen, I'm really over the moon in terms of the level of participation that we've had here today. We're all a little bit nervous leading in today in terms of how well it was going to go, but we're really pleased. So today's not going to be a waste. We really appreciate your time, so we're going to maximise it as much as we can. We're going to go away and actually decipher all the information that we've got here. We'll publish that. And we'll look to take on board a lot of the comments from the tables about having a lot more of these type of sessions and a lot more of a regular basis. I think for that to be really valuable, I think we're going to have to leverage off the industry to be able to get them to present as well in terms of what they're doing well, so we can facilitate that knowledge transfer, keep on saying that term. I guess in terms of the step forward from here, our rehab reform project we're hoping to roll out later this year. A big focus of that is risk management and identification of risks. We've got a whole lot of guidance in the back of that in terms of what we want you to consider as part of your risk assessments. And then our change in focus is really coming down to risk control effectiveness. So it's actually identifying, have you identified your risks and are your controls adequate to actually address that risk? Because ultimately what we want to do is achieve outcome of sustainable rehab outcomes. We also want to make sure that you're safe in doing that. We want to encourage greater collaboration between industry. Yeah, I've already talked about that. So again, thank you very much for today. Safe travels back to all over the state. Appreciate your time, and thank you very much.